Hi there. Okay, today we're going to be going over SMR, or self-myofascial release. This is something that I have my clients do to various muscle groups for various reasons, but it's kind of the act of taking your own pressure, your own device, and affecting your muscle and fascial tissues by yourself. There's two common techniques that you will see out there. One of them will be kind of more of this flushing technique. The flushing technique, you'll see people rolling back and forth on one area up and down without really stopping. The second technique that you'll see is more of a neuromuscular release technique, and that is actually where the brain and mechanoreceptors are having a conversation and letting the tissue's length change because of that conversation. Why would people use various techniques like flushing or more of the neuromuscular or trigger point release? Basically, the flushing technique is used more for overused muscles that need to be warmed up, or it will affect the lymphatic tissue, circulation, that type of thing, getting the muscle to be a little more pliable. When you're looking at the neuromuscular release technique, you're looking at applying that to muscles that have been mechanically shortened from either overuse patterns or compensation patterns from previous injuries or stability issues. There's various reasons why a muscle would be mechanically shortened, and therefore we'd want to adapt and change that tissue. The other reason why we'd want to use a neuromuscular release technique is to affect the fascial system. And the fascial system is a beautiful, complex system that kind of acts as the body's duct tape at certain times and can create a range of motion restriction because it's stuck. Today, we're actually going to be going more over that neuromuscular release technique and how that neuromuscular release is changed through this. So we're going to go ahead and let you see a little video about that right now. When we look at neuromuscular release, we're looking at the neuromuscular system, and that's going to be really defined as how the brain and muscle communicate to create function. That starts with a concept called length-tension relationship, and that basically states that muscle fibers, this is a muscle bundle, have a certain length and tension that they want to be at in order to be healthy and to have the right ability to contract or stretch. Length-tension relationship is ruled by a neurological reaction that is taking place in the muscle with two motor sensors, one being the Golgi tendon, or the GTO, and number two being the muscle spindle. This is the one that communicates to the brain, and these communicate to each other. The interaction that takes place is a fairly complicated situation, and I'm just going to go ahead and explain it in a more simplified manner. But essentially, the muscle spindle, as I have here, acts like a spring, and it's contained in there, the actual muscle fiber that I drew out here. The GTO actually lives in the tendon connection itself, and that guy and this guy talk regularly about that relationship. The simple explanation of the interaction that happens is, let's say this is the roller pressing on the muscle. The muscle spindle in here is a spring, it's nice and short. The Golgi tendon organ feels the tension from the roller. It says, wow, there's a ton of pressure in here, but no movement. Sends a signal up to the brain. The brain gets the signal that there's too much pressure, then sends a signal back down to the Golgi tendon organ to go ahead and give that muscle more space. So then the GTO essentially talks to the muscle spindle and tells that spring to back out a little bit, giving it more length. And that's what's happening in that 30 to 90 seconds that you're holding that spot. Number one, you're gonna pick the muscle group that you're going to affect. This can be tricky because sometimes what you think is tight and short is actually not the one that you're feeling as painful. So you want to be careful for that pitfall. And for OSL, we do a series of dynamic and static assessments. I will say that there are various ways for you to find which muscles are short, and that is going to be in a further video, and we'll give you some basics that are pretty much short on everybody. But number one, you got to pick the muscle group. Number two, you got to pick the device. A lot of things out there in the market. There's these things with knobbies all over them. There's the traditional foam roller that everybody sees. People use like pieces of ABS pipe, softballs, various balls of all choices. You have dowels. You have all these types of yoga ball, foot things, spiky balls. It doesn't matter exactly which device you pick, as it needs to be appropriate for whatever muscle group you would select. So we'll show you further in, let's say for a quadricep, you might want to use the 4-inch pipe versus a dowel, because the dowel is not going to do much. So we need to figure out how and what device will work best for the group that you're trying to affect. Number three, you want to trap the muscle between the device that you use and the structure underneath. For example, in a quadricep, you have a muscle, and underneath that is the femur, and you're actually going to be taking and trapping that muscle between this pipe and that femur underneath. And number four, you're going to stay on that muscle that we picked for 30 to 90 seconds, or until the tenderness in it has reduced by 50%. Neuromuscular release technique. So let's talk about some of the pitfalls of SMR, or self-myofascial release. There's a couple things that people do. They do what I call symptom hunting. They have this thing up in their neck. It's actually being pulled on by other things, but it's what's irritating them. So they'll take whatever they can and dig in there, or they'll take a ball and roll on it. And you actually end up really irritating that symptom. We don't necessarily want to roll every muscle that hurts. We want to find what is short in pulling to release that, so that we can really get the true underlying cause of your pain and tightness. So one of the analogies that I kind of throw in there is, people have these muscle situations going on in their body where you have the picked on little kid and you have the bully. So like at the hip, let's say you have a big quad pulling your hip forward, and therefore it's kind of making you overwork and use your back, and people will take a ball and put it in their back and roll on their back, but really it's the bully of the quad pulling the pelvis forward that ends up making that person lean into their back or overuse their back in a way where this is really stabilizing and moving more than you want it to. So you'd actually want to pick opening the quad and changing how the pelvis sits versus how the back is being affected. So this big bully is picking on this little kid, and you're taking this ball and picking on the little kid more versus telling the bully to go home. The other thing is just symptom hunting or digging for those tender spots, and just finding a tender spot, a tender spot, a tender spot, a tender spot, and not really knowing the why or what. Like I just mentioned that quad, if it's tight, it's going to pull your pelvis forward. Well, we don't want to then get a bunch of other muscles that aren't in charge of pulling that pelvis forward. We actually want to get the muscle that pulls the pelvis forward. So you'll see people kind of crank on their IT bands. A lot of times that's a false stabilizer. That's trying to stabilize for something else that's not working. If you don't understand why you're opening the muscle, you might be opening something that's stabilizing you and therefore create a bigger problem. And where I see this the most is when people are like, oh yeah, well I had this thing in my shoulder and then I got a massage and they really worked on my trap and then it seemed to get worse. And that's because you actually opened the one thing that was kind of stabilizing this very fragile environment, and it created a bigger problem or more symptomology. The most important thing that I want you to take away from this is that To do SMR appropriately, you need to know the why you're doing it, you need to know what you're affecting, you need to know what device is the best, and you need to know how you're going to affect it in a way that will actually create the change that you want. It is powerful if done appropriately to reestablish proper movement patterns and to take away pain. But it's only one part of the equation. We need to open things that are too tight, but we also need to activate what's underactive. And that's something that I'm going to be discussing coming further as well, making sure that the underlying stability and motion patterns in all of our movement is equal and working like it should. And that's one of the most important parts. Look for you at further videos, and I hope you have a great day. Make sure to like and subscribe.